Amnesia Rebirth is a game about babies. Big babies, small babies, necrotic undead babies. It's a great resource for new parents hoping to learn how to best care for their children. It also contains a variety of tips to help expecting mothers while their child is still in utero. Set in the prosperous decade of the 1930s, this heartwarming story sees you take on the role of Tassi Trianon, a French woman on a vacation with her husband to the colony of Algeria, an overseas territory that was treated very well. Throughout the experience, you'll interact with the locals, make friends with other tourists, and experience the miracle of an extra-dimensionally accelerated childbirth. Just a quick warning though, I'm going to be talking about the whole game here, so there's going to be spoilers. If you have any plans to play this game for yourself, you might want to skip this video, but if you have played it, or you just don't care about spoilers, please continue on as I take you through the joys of parenthood as portrayed in... As is customary at this point, let's talk briefly about the game's development. After the release of Soma, Frictional decided to return to the Amnesia series, as they felt such a move would shorten the length of the development cycle due to their established familiarity with the world. After a period of discussion surrounding what the team perceived to be the strengths and weaknesses of both the original Amnesia as well as Soma, a vision for the new game began to form. Combining Soma's emphasis on narrative and Amnesia's more puzzle and enemy-heavy style of gameplay, the team began to create a game with a story centered around the theme of survival, with the gameplay and style of horror reflecting this. After 5 years of development, so much for a shortened development cycle, the game was released in the year of our hellscape 2020. From a gameplay perspective, it brings back many of the features that were absent in Machine for Pigs. The sanity system returns, although modified and renamed Fear, as well as an emphasis on conserving fuel for your lantern. Regarding the lantern, it's actually much more difficult to use in this game due to the fact that it burns through gas, which is much harder to come by than oil was in the first game. Most of the time, I ended up relying on matches for light. Matches in this game function as an essentially more versatile tinderbox, allowing you to not just activate light sources within the level, but can also serve as a personal method of illumination, provided you don't take more than 4 steps at a time. Before you can get to any of the survival parts of the game, you have to go through a lengthy story section of the game. Similar to A Machine for Pigs, Rebirth has a lot more emphasis on story than the first game. Like I said in the intro, you play as a woman named Tassi Trianon, an engineering drafter who goes on a multinational expedition with her husband Salim. This expedition is occurring in the aftermath of the death of their daughter Elise, who got some kind of wasting disease and, wasted. So they agree to go on this expedition to Algeria, and because this is a horror game, it goes about as well as expected. The plane crashes for some reason, and Tassi awakes an unknown amount of time later with no memory of what has happened since they hit the ground. This is a condition known as amnesia.
Wow.
That's what it looks like whenever I wake up in the morning. Stuck in the desert, no water, everyone else is fucked off somewhere, and by the way, you're also pregnant, and no, it is definitely not a food baby. You make your way through the desert, sun beating down on you, baby beating down in you, before you find a cave. In this cave, you find evidence that you and the rest of the survivors sought shelter in here. Through a combination of flashbacks and conveniently placed backstory documents, you discover that Salim was left behind due to an injury and is probably still nearby. While exploring the caves, you come to 2 realizations. Firstly, Tassi is infected with some kind of disease which is causing her to slowly mutate. Her symptoms worsen whenever she feels intense fear or anger, so stay out of the dark and avoid playing Warzone. The second realization is that she awoke wearing a bracelet that looks like something out of a high school crafts class that also lets her travel into an alternate dimension whenever her path is inconveniently blocked. During your first trip into the other world, you discover the corpse of an explorer named Herbert I forgot his last name. Based on the date in his dying note, he came to his end here 100 years ago. This is the first of many little plot threads that serve to tie Rebirth directly into the narrative of the first game. You see, unlike A Machine for Pigs, this is actually an Amnesia game, so certain aspects of the first game's story will come up here. You fuck around the Dark World for a little bit longer, and then make it back to the caves of Africa and are reunited with Salim. He's dead, but he has a lantern next to him, so his death was not in vain, except it was, because like I said earlier, the lantern runs out of fuel if you use it for literally any amount of time. With the newly acquired piece of equipment and newly acquired single status, you go out into the desert looking for the rest of the survivors. You come across a fort that was apparently at one point owned by the French. Inside this fortress of Francophilia, you do not find any baguettes, but you do find a tank, which you can use to blow up the door that is blocking your progression. You also hear the voice of one of the other survivors over a nearby radio. You fumble around the dark, hear some spooky noises, solve a few puzzles, remember those from the first game? Eventually you get the radio and learn nothing new really, other than that the only 2 members of your party left are a German doctor, don't ask him who he voted for in 1933, and an Arab woman named Yasmin, who is apparently sick, presumably with whatever Tassi has as well. So next you have to get a shell for the tank, which I almost blew myself up doing. Load the shell in the tank, blow down the door, none of it meant anything because the ground under the tank caves in and now you're in a sewer system. I hear you asking about enemy encounters encounters now, which is convenient because that's where I got my first good look at one. There are two enemy types in this game, ghouls and another one that doesn't show up until later. Ghouls function pretty much the exact same as the gatherers from the original game and the pigmen from the second one. The encounters with them seem to be much more scripted overall, and this is one of the few areas in the game where you have to avoid one that patrols an area. I was not successful. The main goal in this area is to make your way back to the surface. If she fell all the way to the bottom there, I would have been so pissed. Are you fucking kidding me? Alright, well you eventually get out of that hellhole and end up back in the desert, where you can't remember your pain, for there ain't no one but to give you no gains. Use your wristwatch and end up back in the other world. On this trip, you get a feel for the civilization that lived here. Culturally, they seem to resemble Earth's ancient cultures, Egypt, Greece, Rome, you know what I'm talking about. What's interesting is that despite this, they were much more technologically advanced than we are. They got stone iPads. If you haven't guessed yet, this is presumably the alternate dimension that Alexander, the villain of the first game, hailed from. The culture here focused around the worship of an immortal empress who was kept alive through the administration of Adreno. God damn it, we're back to this plot point. Yeah boy, we got Vitae here. The scientists of this realm engage in mass torture of unlucky individuals in order to generate the good stuff which keeps the queen alive. Later on, after exploring a tomb back in the real world, you end up in this kind of torture labyrinth where they would have people get hunted by ghouls, which were apparently made for the express purpose of torturing people to get adrenochrome. We're not calling it Vitae in here, don't at me. Another neat little plot point is that every time you go to the other world, your pregnancy gets pushed forward by a few months, which is expectedly kind of a problem. I'm not a physician, but wouldn't this baby be turned to mush by now? I mean, goddamn, this woman must have a womb of steel. Back to the story. In the torture maze, you meet one of the survivors from your group, who is not only a zombie, he's also a racist zombie. After letting it slip that you think Miles Morales is a good character, you escape his wrath and add Contact the Southern Poverty Law Center to your Back to Civilization to-do list. Back in the other world now, and look what I found. You have to use it to progress further into the complex, but if you remember the first game, getting a hold of one of these pisses off a certain fleshy extra-dimensional force. Run the fuck away from that shit and end up at a tram station. It's here that you meet the game's second enemy, the raids. I was not good at hiding from these things, but luckily the developers were prepared for people like me to be bad at the game, so every time you die, Tossie goes goblin mode and skips ahead a little bit. After channeling my Deus Ex skills, I managed to sneak past like 1,000 of these bitches and snap back to reality. So we finally made it to the village and can meet up with the doctor and Yasmin. In a shocking twist that I'm sure absolutely no one saw coming, Yasmin has ghouled out and killed everyone in the village. Tossie's water breaks and you have to run through the desert, prairie dogging her fucking child while this psychotic undead bitch is chasing you. I'm sorry, I can't get over how fucked up this situation is. Her doctor saves you though, and you get a nice interactive birth sequence. I'm dead serious right now. And give birth to a beautiful, healthy, where the fuck are you going? You get your ass back here. I didn't carry that bastard around this whole game just for your bitch ass to go raising Arizona on me. So it turns out that during their initial exploration through all this, Tossie and the rest of her group encountered the spirit of the other world's empress. She made them a deal. She would save them, but only if Tossie gave her the child. Tossie, obviously not wanting to do that, refused the offer, so instead she infected everyone with her ghoul gunk, and now the doctor hopes that if he tosses her the kid, he can save himself. Tossie hulks out on him and fucks him up, and the queen once again gives her an ultimatum. Leave the kid here, where she'll be able to live forever off adrenochrome and not die from the same illness that Elise had, or Tossie and the brat can fuck off back to Paris. There's a third option where you can sabotage the Vitae pumps around the chamber with the essence of the shadow, which kills all three of you, but I couldn't find the last pump, so I didn't do that. Instead, I got the fuck out of there, much to the queen's dismay, and ended up back home in Paris with my child, where Tossie presumably gives her the best life she can. Ignore what happens to France 3 years later. So that was Amnesia Rebirth. Definitely not an uneventful game. One last thing I want to talk about, I was actually surprised to see that there's a custom stories option on the main menu. I've never heard of any mods for this game, so I looked it up, and apparently there's actually very few custom levels that were ever actually made for this game. I'm not really sure why that is, though I'd guess it's probably just harder to work with than the older engine, but I'm not a modder, so I don't know, I just thought it was interesting. With all that said though, this game was a pretty wild ride from start to finish. It may not reach the same level that the Dark Descent did, but I think it was ultimately a step back in the right direction after the last game. Plus, what other game can you say has an interactive birth-giving sequence? That's next level. Hey everybody, if you made it this far into the video, I just want to say thanks. It means a whole lot. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all your standard YouTube outro stuff that you always hear. And other than that, I will see y'all in the next video. Goodbye.